We're doing the Sikha on the first Sikha for this week on Parshas Vayelach. Aleph. And apologies, I did not do an outline, but I figure it's a short Sikha, so it will be easier to keep. Ala pasuk ben mea ve'esrim shana anoichi hayim loy uchal oid latzeis b'lavoi. On the pasuk, and this is Moshe talking about himself, that today I am 120 years old and I can no longer go and come. So those of us who are feeling a little bit older, shame on us. We're not 120 years old yet, so nothing to complain about. Okay, so I'm 120 years old today and I can no longer go out and come. Amru Chazal, our sages taught, Shemashmos haloshan kanhi, that what this means here is loy latzeis v'lavoi mamish sharei tashash kochi. It's not telling us that he literally can't walk or that he's having difficulty with moving, because we've already been told that his strength was waning. So this is not what this pasuk is teaching. This is not the news flash. Ki'im, but rather, latzeis v'lavoi b'divrei Torah. But it's about going out and coming in words of Torah. Malamed, the Chachamim teach that this teaches us shenistatmu mimenu sharei chachma, that the gates of wisdom were literally, it means stuffed up from before him or sealed from before him. V'hinei maimer zehuva b'perish Rashi el Torah, and this teaching is brought by Rashi in his commentary on the Torah. Ach b'shinui lashon, but he changes the terminology. B'makom sharei chachma, instead of saying the gates of wisdom, halashon b'divrei Rashi, this is the terminology of Rashi. Misoires uma'ayanos hachachma. That what was sealed from him or what was made inaccessible to him were the traditions and the well springs of wisdom. Now the Rebbe compares and contrasts this with other sources and how they treat the same concept. Be'ein Yaakov, Val derech zeh bekama rishonim, the Ein Yaakov, and according to a number of rishonim, Meifia Hagirsa, so there you find the version b'divrei Hagemara ma'ayanos. Only it's the well springs were sealed. B'makom sharei, instead of saying the gates, it's the well springs. Ubetanchuma, and in the Medrash Tanchuma and Eschanan Hagirsa, the version is Masoires Chachma, the tradition of wisdom. Aval benois of l'kach shaton bir lamaloi hevi Rashi Hagirsa harvacha sharei chachma. In addition to the fact that we need an explanation as to why Rashi did not embrace the most well-known way of understanding this, which is Sharei Chachma, the gates of wisdom, Hari Oid Ve'ikar, but additionally and especially we have to understand B'shum Makai b'midrashi Chazal shlefanenu, in all of the different midrashim, we do not find one place, we don't find one place where both of these terms are used in conjunction. Misoires umayanes, v'chein loy masoires b'shari. We don't find any place where it says the traditions and the well springs were sealed from him, or the traditions and the gates were sealed from him. V'ilu Rashi tzireh v'shtei hagirsois yachad. But Rashi fused both of these versions. He did a mashup. So why? V'oid eina muvan, and another thing that's not understood, commotion is bar b'kama mekaymes, as has been explained in many places. Ein in yono shall perish Rashi alater lahatig drushes chazal b'diuk l'shoinam. It's not Rashi's thing, it's not Rashi's style to simply cite midrashim from our sages exactly the way they are found in the sources. In other words, he very often changes the order of words, he deletes certain things, he adds certain things. So in accordance with this that we know about Rashi, when we're looking at the Rashi that's before us, why does Rashi bring down the terminology, the traditions and the well springs of wisdom, v'loy kasa b'lashon haragila, and doesn't do it in a more conventional way, especially because, in the parentheses, Rashi begins his comment with saying to go out and to come in words of Torah. So why doesn't he continue with using the term Torah and say shenistamu mimenu divrei Torah, that the words of Torah were blocked from him or sealed from him or stuffed up from him? Why does he go to the term chachma? Okay, so to review our questions, why does Rashi combine two different versions from two different places? And he tells us that the Masoires Umayanes HaChachma were rendered inaccessible to Moshe, both the traditions and the well springs. Why doesn't he use the most oft-cited or the most well-publicized version, which is Sharei Chachma, the gates of wisdom? That's one question. The other is, why doesn't Rashi talk about the traditions and the well springs of Torah? That would seem to be more in keeping with what he's teaching here. Instead, he says the traditions and the well springs of wisdom. Seif Beis. V'yesh leimar. We might say that the reason for this is shebekach misalik Rashi sheila pshuta b'lashon ha'olam aklotz kasha. We might say that through Rashi's very careful, very punctilious terminology, he dismisses a very simple but basic question. The Rebbe used to use the term aklotz kasha, like it's so simple. And the Rebbe says about this klotz kasha, shaloi matzasi la'es ata misha yodimba, and I haven't found anybody who has dealt with this very simple, very seemingly basic question, which is Haketzad Nemar La'uchal Oid Latseis V'Lavoi B'Divrei Torah B'Shah Shetekif La'achar Mikein Masar Moshe Rabbeinu L'Vnei Yisrael Ribu Yinyanei Torah Shaloyish HaParshiyos Vayelach Ha'azinu V'Zois HaBracha. Question mark, exclamation point. How can we say that there was some type of obstruction or sealing off of Torah from Moshe when immediately after Moshe says this, he then goes on to impart to Bnei Yisrael three parshas, Vayelach, Ha'azinu, and Zeis HaBracha. So that means that he does have access to Torah. So what does it mean? Lo uchal oid, let's say, v'lavoi. In the brackets, v'rak b'yachas le'shmeinas hapsukim ha'achreinim shebetorah shehaschalosam hi v'yamas sham Moshe, and it's only regarding the last 8 psukim in the Torah, which begin with the words "and Moshe died there." Matzinu shtei deyos kimuva gam b'perush Rashi. We find two opinions. Rashi brings down these two opinions. Either in Yehoshua Kosvam, either Yehoshua wrote those last 8 psukim of the Torah, or Moshe Kaisev B'Dema, or that Moshe wrote these last 8 psukim about his own passing with tears. But when it comes to the last 3 parshas of the Torah, until the last 8 psukim, Leis man depolek sheMoshe Rabbeinu amram v'kosvam. There's nobody that argues that Moshe said this and Moshe wrote this. So what does it mean? Lo ucha lavoi, let's say for lavoi. What does it mean? I can't go out and come in b'divrei Torah. He still had so much Torah that he shared after this point. Ve'ein l'tarish b'lashon divrei Torah kavana hi l'nyani halacha. And don't try to explain this away and say that divrei Torah means halacha bilvad, that it's only halacha, that the only thing he didn't have access to and was unable to teach was halacha. Ki, because. Now in the parentheses, b'nois of l'kach shazeu doichecha ki gadol loymar shedvarim shebetorah shebechtav eina bechlal divrei Torah. In addition to the fact that this is such a far stretch, this is so far-fetched to say that things that are written in Torah Shebechsav would not be included in Divrei Torah and words of Torah. But on top of this, like impossible thing to conceptualize, mainly the Parshas Halalu Yeshnon Gam Halachos. Even if you want to argue that Divrei Torah here would mean only halachos, but these parshas have halachos. There's the mitzvah of Hakel, there's the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah v'oid, and more mitzvahs. Yesera mizu, and more overarchingly, even more, kol teva b'Torah shebechtav nitna leMoshe in perusha. The Rambam teaches us that every single word of the Torah shebechsav was imparted to Moshe with its explanation b'Torah shebal peh, in a oral transmission of Torah. Shechein al yedei zeh dafka, because it's only through this system nitan ledaz bebirur es hakavana b'Torah shebechtav kimuv pashtos. This is the only way that you could know clearly what the words of the Torah bechtav intend for us to know. Kimuvim b'pashtos. This is self-understood that there are so many psukim that are impossible to access, impossible to understand without the Torah Shebal Peh. U'mi'achar shegam shleish parshiyos eila vayelach hazinu u'bracha nimsru l'bnei Yisrael al yedei Moshe Rabbeinu, and since Moshe Rabbeinu also imparted to Bnei Yisrael these last three parshiyos of the Torah, harei shebivadai masram imkol hamuchar lavanas parshiyos elu. So for sure he imparted this with everything necessary to understand these parshas. Kolaymar, this is to say, shemasar games haperish shel parshas elu shebetor shebal peh, that he emphatically imparted the explanation for these parshas, including everything in the Torah shebal peh. Ve'in kain, and once we understand this, if this is so, ech efshar loymar loyuchal oy latzeis v'levay b'divrei Torah. How could you say that when Moshe Rabbeinu said, I can't do this anymore, that this means that he wasn't able to teach Torah anymore? And therefore, Rashi adds, Shenistamu mimenu misoyres umayanes hachachma. Rashi explains what this pasuk means very, very carefully using these particular words. That it's in regard to these two things, misoyres umayanes hachachma, the traditions and the wellsprings of wisdom. These two aspects, and the Rebbe is going to explain what they are, but only these two aspects can be included, can be excluded from the Divrei Torah, the words of Torah, Shalimed Moshe Rabbeinu L'vnei Yisrael b'shlosh parshiyos elu. So there's something about these two terms, Misoyres and Mayanas HaChachma. They're two categories or subsidiary aspects of the Torah that Moshe did teach in the last three parshas of the Torah. Kidulakama, the Rebbe says, like we're going to explain in the next seif. Okay? So the Rebbe says, you cannot opine that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't teach Torah afterwards. Therefore, Rashi comes and addresses this klutz kasha, this glaring elephant in the room, and he explains very carefully what it was that was sealed off from Moshe. But it wasn't the Torah that he taught. So what was it? Gimel. Perish Hamila Misoyres. So what's the explanation of the term Misoyres traditions? Who? Ha'inyanim shenimsru l'Moshe misinai ba'al peh. This refers to those things that were imparted to Moshe in Sinai ba'al peh, orally. V'yesh loymar, we might say, dekoi b'myuchad al hinyanim she'ein lahem afilu remez b'Torah shebechtav. This is a very, very specific category. Misoyres speaks to the information that was imparted to Moshe in Sinai that have no allusion, no remez, no hint at all in the Torah Shebachtav. It cannot be extrapolated or learned from what's in the Torah Shebachtav. And the Rebbe brings down in the brackets, the Gemara says, Torah, roiv bichsav, umiot al peh. Most of the Torah, including the oral Torah, is found in or can be extracted from or extrapolated or learned out from the Torah Shebachsav, and a small portion was imparted ba'al peh, orally. Okafisha Perzais Rashi, and like Rashi on the Gemara explains, Roiv Bichsav. What does it mean, Roiv Bichsav? Most of it was written. Roiv Hatayra Tluya B'Medrash Chuli. Midash Hatar Nidreshes Behen. Most of the Torah is rooted in and dependent on midrashim that use the hermeneutic rules, that use the midash hatar nidreshes behen, the rules that Moshe Rabbeinu taught at Sinai for how to excavate and plumb the depth of Torah. Umiuta al peh, and a very small amount is completely ba'al peh, completely orally. She'ein remez l'limud lilmoid la b'Torah ela l'Moshe nemar al peh. And there's no way that you can find an allusion to this in the Torah. It was all taught to Moshe ba'al peh. That is what it means, misoyres, the traditions. What about ma'yanais hachachma, the well springs of knowledge? Perusham, the explanation for this is loy gufe halacha shel Torah sheba'al peh. This is not referring to the halachas of Torah sheba'al peh, the gufe halachas, the large categories of halachas sheba'al peh, ella, but rather. So in other words, it's not referring to the practicum, to that which a Jew has to know for how to go through life and what to do, ella, but rather pilpula shel Torah, discussions and debate, shehu bedugmas mayan, which is like a wellspring of Lashon HaMishnah. The Mishnah calls a mayan hamizgaber. A wellspring is something that's constantly strengthening itself. There's no end to pilpul. Ulipilpula daraisa engvul. There's absolutely no border. There's no end to how much you can discuss and debate in the Torah. B'lashon hakasov, in the words of Eof, arucha me'eretz mida. The Torah is longer than the earth, urechava miniyam, and is wider than the sea. Ukanir b'chush, and you could see this. You could see, like, just practically, that there's no end to the amount of dialectics and discussions and debates that you can have surrounding Torah. Umizem muvan ubepashtos, and from this we understand simply shebedivrei Torah shalimed Moshe levnei Yisrael, that in the words of Torah that Moshe taught to Bnei Yisrael, afilu bepeirusha miTorah sheba'al peh, inclusive of all the explanations of the Torah Shebachtav, which comprise the Torah Sheba'al Peh, nichlala rak gufei halachas v'pirushim chulei sheTorah Sheba'al Peh, avaloi pilpula daraisa she'en likvul. So that included all the big categories of halachas and all the explanations of Torah Sheba'al Peh, but not the infinite debating surrounding Torah. And how much more so, based on what the Gemara teaches, shepilpule de araisa loy nitna ela l'Moshe lazare, that this science or this enterprise of discussion and debate and dialectic surrounding Torah was only given to Moshe and his children. Ella, however, sheMoshe nahag b'tayvas ayev nitna liYisrael. But Moshe was so generous, so magnanimous, and he gave this infinite body to Bnei Yisrael. Shemikach muvan. From this we understand, from this Gemara, Shagam lule pulpule daraisa From this we understand that even without the pilpul da'araisa, without this infinite enterprise of discussion and debate surrounding Torah, divrei Torah, what Moshe did teach and what was received by Bnei Yisrael from Moshe, was already complete and consummate. In other words, nothing was missing from what they practically, actually had to know. V'zehu shaloi nakat Rashi b'peshut shel mikras haloshen shari chachma she'ein ba kol sheiches l'chilukim l'teichen hanal. And with this, the Rebbe answers a question of why Rashi doesn't use the most widely known expression, which is shari chachma, the gates of chachma. And the Rebbe answers because Rashi wanted to answer this very basic question, this quote-unquote klotz kasha, which is, how could you say that Moshe lost his ability to teach Torah when there were 3 more parshias that he taught after this moment? Therefore, Rashi uses his words very, very carefully, like a laser beam, and he hones in on the terms misoires and ma'ayanos. Shari chachma, to use the most oft-cited term, the gates of wisdom, that remains amorphous. It's very lyrical, but what does it actually mean? And it wouldn't answer the question that is glaring. Al pizeh yesh levaris hatam lekach sherashi diek lahabi games hateva ma'ayanos hachachma. And the Rebbe says, and now we're going to answer the question that I asked previously as to why Rashi specifically used the term chachma, ma'ayanos hachachma, and not ma'ayanos haTorah. V'lo kasa ma'ayanos haTorah lahadgish, because he wants to underscore shahamayanos einam davar hamuchar chabar idin haTorah v'hira, because he wants to underscore in answering this big question that what was held back from Moshe at this point when he was 120 was not what is necessary for Torah. Because if it would have been necessary, then it would have been necessary for Moshe to teach us. But rather, this is a additional overlay in the wisdom of the Torah. Not necessary, but an additional overlay that became inaccessible to him. Okay, so now the Rebbe has basically answered the questions that he asked on Rashi's terminology, why he uses these words, why he does this mashup of ma'ayanos and misoires and ma'ayanos, why he doesn't use the word shari chachma, why he uses chachma and not Torah, even though he begins his perush with using the term Torah. But the Rebbe is not satisfied. And in Dalet, the Rebbe says, however, it's still not computing exactly. This is still not a good enough explanation. This idea that the traditions and the well springs of wisdom, which the Rebbe has explained to us, are additional overlays, and that these were held back from Moshe. This was brought down by Rashi as a reason for why Moshe can't go out and come in words of Torah. Shepirushahu loy halimud la'atzmai ela halimud in bnei Yisrael. The simple explanation of Moshe's declaration that I'm 120 today, I can no longer go out and come in, is that he's speaking not about his own scholarship, but about his ability to teach Bnei Yisrael. V'im kain eina muvan. And if this is what Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, then it's not understood. B'shlema b'negei l'misayros muvan she'im nistamu etzel Moshe ha'misayros shel Torah ein hu yachol l'tzeis v'levay. When it comes to the misayros, those things that only Moshe Rabbeinu has imparted to him from the Eibishter, halacha l'Moshe miSinai. There's no hint, there's no way to extract this from the Torah itself. It's understood how he can't be a good teacher of Bnei Yisrael anymore. Dahainu, li'yozeh shemoises Torah l'Bnei Yisrael. Shechem Bnei Yisrael tzrichim behechach l'das games hamasoros. We understand that he can't be the one to impart Torah to Bnei Yisrael because Bnei Yisrael absolutely need to know this information, the Masoros. But here, the Rebbe is parsing the difference between Masoros and Mayanis. But when it comes to the discussions and the debates, the Pilpulei Daraisa, the infinite, never-ending dialectic surrounding Torah, once we ascertained, as we did above, that this is not necessary for Bnei Yisrael to have. It's an additional overlay. So what is the understanding? What is the explanation of this idea that because the Mayanis HaChachma were blocked from him, they're stuffed up, he can no longer teach Bnei Yisrael? What does it mean? We already ascertained that it's not necessary for them to know this. And you can't say that the word only refers to the Mesoros, only refers to that which Moshe Rabbeinu got at Sinai that has no even an allusion in the Torah Shebachtav. Kilafiza, because if you want to argue that, Madua Hebi HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'kach Shenistamu Mimoshe Gam Mayanis HaChachma. So then, why did Hashem cause that Moshe should also not be able to access the Pilpulei Da'araisa, the discussions and the debates? And why would Rashi mention that? So there has to be more going on here, something deeper. The Rebbe says we might say that the explanation is as follows. Ha gufa shegia matzav shel nistemu bechelek mitayrasai. This very fact that he came to a situation where even some part of his Torah was blocked off, was stuffed off, was rendered inaccessible to him. This is very, very subtle and beautiful. Rebbe is saying that even though it's possible that that which became inaccessible to him was not even necessary for Bnei Yisrael. However, harei simon shenistayim tafkidei latzeis v'lavoy lebnei Yisrael. But he understood from this that this was a sign that his mission, latzeis v'lavoy, to go out and to come in as Bnei Yisrael's primary teacher, had concluded. Dahainu nisiusai, meaning his leadership. Ubaz manai shel Yeshua lias manag Yisrael. And it was Yeshua's turn, it was Yeshua's time to now become the manig. In other words, even though he was able to teach everything that Bnei Yisrael needed, seemingly, practically, but Rashi includes not just the extra, but also, no, I'm sorry, the opposite. Rashi wants to tell us that even though there was something that was impeded from him that was extra, there was the Messiahs. So why doesn't Rashi just bring down Messiahs? Then we would understand. We would understand that if this is information that only Moshe has, he's the sole container of this information, and he no longer has access to it, okay, so it's time for somebody else to take over. But Rashi also adds about that which seemingly is not necessary. And the Rebbe says that this underscores that Moshe Rabbeinu understood that when there was any change, even one that would not practically impact his flock, but any change at all in his ability to teach signaled that he's not the right leader for this time. U'ba'emek yeser. And the Rebbe is now going to deepen this. Yeduam divrei Chazal. It's well known what the Gemara teaches. Shehuva Perish Rashi al Torah, and it's also brought in the Perish of Rashi on Torah in Pinchas. Asher Pnei Moshe kechama, Pnei Yeshua kilvana. That Moshe was like the sun, and Yeshua was like the moon. Echad hachilukim bein or hachachma laor halvanahu. One of the differences between the light of the sun versus the light of the moon is she'or halavana matzui b'chol eis b'matzav shel shinuyim. That the moonlight is always changing. It's always fluctuating. Aliyahs, v'yeridas, it gets larger, it gets smaller, it goes up, it goes down. Masha ein kein, a contradistinction, ba'or hachama ein shinui. But the sun is constant, never changes. V'zehu echad mehatamim l'kach sheMoshe nimshal l'chama dafka. And this is one of the reasons why Moshe is compared to the sun specifically. Lefi shamidasei shel Moshe hi midas ha'emes. Because the midah of Moshe was emes. Moshe emes v'Torasei emes. Shenyanahu bilti shinui. In emes, there's no changes, right? Like we all know the well-known idea that emes is aleph, mem, saf, that from the beginning through the middle to the end, it's all unchanging. It's all true. In the light of Moshe, there's no place for fluctuation. And therefore, when he felt that the well springs of Chachma, which the Rebbe explained is the pilpulei de Torah, the well springs of discussion and debate, that's not absolutely necessary for learning and teaching Torah. Sheme'ata, that from that time yesh stima, there's some kind of obstruction, vishinui ba'oirei, and there's a change in his light. Harezu gufer raya. This itself is proof. Shenifka etzem minyane shel oirei, that in some way the essence of his light became flawed. Hatafkil says for Moshe, that his mission of going out and coming in, of teaching of Moshe, was somehow compromised. And therefore, and therefore there's no difference as to what was obstructed from him, what was sealed off from him. And even if it was, if one of the things that were obstructed from him was something that doesn't have a practical impact on Bnei Yisrael and his teaching Torah to them, hine etzem inin hashinui, but the very idea that there was some kind of change, ma'chiach kvar, it teaches him already, it proves already, shegia eshel shinuyim, that he has now come to an era, to a time of changes, ubaz manai shel pnei Yeshua kolvana, ara shayach l'shinuyim. And now it's time for Yeshua, which is a different energy, a different light. It's a light of changes and gradations and fluctuation. There's a lot to unpack here in terms of knowing when it's time to leave graciously and give the reins to somebody else, and the avek lake to the Inyan, like just, it's not about you. It's about what does the Inyan need? What do Bnei Yisrael need now? But editorializing is not what we do in the middle of the Sikha for sure, and especially Erev Rosh Hashanah. So we're going to go to the Hayra. Hey, be'inyan zeh, kefi shu etzel Moshe, ba gam Hayra ba'avodas kol echad miYisrael. So from this idea, from this concept regarding Moshe, there is instruction and there is a lesson in our spiritual work for each one of us. Shechein, af al pi shemihu zeh ve'ezehu asher arav liba legeshes lahasig afilu chelek echad mini elef madregas raya mehemna Moshe Rabbeinu. The Rebbe says, who amongst us has the audacity to even consider themselves in the same category, a millionth, a billionth of the level of the faithful shepherd of Moshe Rabbeinu. But hare mitzad zeh, but because shekol nefesh v'nefesh from Beis Yisrael yesh ba mevchinas Moshe Rabbeinu olav hashalom, because Alter Rebbe teaches us in Tanya that there's something of Moshe Rabbeinu in each Jew. B'yacholtei shel kol Yehudi, it is possible for each Jew lahagia lidei efes katseu v'shemetz minehu, that every Jew can aspire and reach to a minute, tiny portion of Moshe Rabbeinu. V'yesh leimar, and so we might say, based on the fact that there is some plausibility in our taking a lesson from Moshe, that this is a way we can understand something that the Gemara teaches, that that anybody who forgets one thing from his teachings, from his learnings, the Torah reckons that he is a person that has to give up his life. Seemingly, I mean, really, why should a person be subject to such a stringent, such a terrible punishment for forgetting one thing from his teachings, from his learnings? A question and exclamation point. So he knows everything in Torah except he forgot one thing, and he's chayav benafshay. How could this be? So one of the explanations in this is as follows. Eitzel ish Yisrael tzrichim divrei haTorah liyos chakukim be'etzem mitziusay. By every Jew, the words of Torah have to be inscribed in her essence. Ad la'ofen shel kol mila b'Torah nagaz be'etzem mitziusay. And every word of Torah has to be important, has to reach the Jew's essence. It has to bother the Jew. Balkain, and therefore, etzem ha'ma'ura shel sheicher davar echem mishnasai. Just the incident that a Jew could forget. We're not even going to talk about what they forgot, how much more they remember, but the ability to forget at all, as little as this might be, it should cause him to be so broken that it would be like he has to give up his life. So maybe, I don't know, I don't know, maybe this is not a good thing to say, but you would never, ever try to comfort someone who lost something very precious by saying, "Oh, but you have many more." You never do that, because that's to not understand the loss. You can't mitigate the loss, irrespective of what's left. So the Rebbe is saying that one way of understanding this is that Torah has to be so deeply ingrained that forgetting even a small part has to break the Jew. And so it is with time. That every moment in time, a Jew has to be connected to Torah, and therefore, when a Jew squanders that time for Torah learning, God forbid, he carries to carries. The Torah uses very strong terminology. Should be cut off. What does it mean? Hadavar pagea be'etzem mitziosai. It bothers him, and it hurts him, and it impacts him on the most essential level. Shachein hadavar hapoyel kan chisarein ene kamos hazman shegora min alimud, kim etzem hadavar shecholaf rega sheboy loy haya kosher l'Torah. Because the point is not how much time was lost. It's that any increment of time was lost from studying Torah. And now the Rebbe widens the lens from just Torah learning to everything having to do with Yiddishkeit. Eitzel Yehudi inyan avodas Hashem tzarich liyos nechkak b'mitziusai. Avodas Hashem has to be inscribed and chiseled out in our essence. Kach she'inyan hazutar b'yoser b'avodas Hashem. Afilu diktu kal shel divrei sofrim, or afilu minig Yisrael tzarich liyos negei eloi b'nefesh, such that even the smallest aspect of avodas Hashem, even a detail of a mitzvah d'Rabbanan or a edict, a gezer of the Rabbanan, or even a minhag, has to be benefesh. It has to reach our very essence. So much so that if he's missing, if he's unable to fulfill that, afilu davar echad v'divrei achikal, even one thing that this person is not able to fulfill, and even though it's not the most important, harei zepoel shvira b'chol mahusay. It breaks his whole essence. V'davar zegufa mevir lahesib avodas Hashem, and this causes him to add in his avodas Hashem, ובאופן שהוא מרגיש אשר כל עניין טוב שעושה מוסיף בעצם חיוסו, in a way where he feels that every good thing that he does adds to the vivifying force of his essence. Devekos is cleaving b'mechaye chayim, in the force that gives life, the Eibishter, makar hachayim, the source of life. Va'at, like we say, va'atem hadvekim b'Hashem elokechem chayim kolchem hayim, that you who cleave on to Hashem your God, you, all of you, are living today.
Just
That's
sorry. The question: when you forget